Have you ever met someone who seems to see straight into your soul? Not in that warm, comforting way a true friend does, but with an intensity that leaves you exposed, almost breathless. They remember the smallest detail you whispered in a moment of vulnerability, the story of that childhood scar, the fear you bury deep. And they weave it back into conversation like a gentle thread. You feel seen, understood. But then a whisper in your mind. Is this connection or calculation? What if I told you there's a shadow lurking in the heart of empathy itself? A type of person Carl Jung might have warned us about in his darkest journals. The dark empath. Not the cold narcissist who bulldozes your boundaries, nor the impulsive psychopath who acts without remorse. No, this is subtler, more insidious. They feel your pain, map your emotions with surgical precision, and then they twist it. For power, for control, for their own hidden agenda. Jung, that profound explorer of the human psyche, didn't name them directly, but his teachings on the shadow, the repressed darkness we all carry, paint a vivid picture. He knew empathy wasn't always a gift. In the wrong hands, it becomes a blade. And today, we're diving into that abyss. Not to scare you, but to arm you. Because once you see the dark empath for what they are, you'll never be vulnerable again. You'll transform. Stick with me. This journey might just save your soul. Imagine lying awake at night, replaying a conversation where someone got you so perfectly it felt like magic. But deep down, an unease stirs. That's the pull, the magnetic force drawing you in. Jung called it the allure of the unconscious, the way our shadows call to each other across the void. And the dark empath. They're masters at this dance. They don't storm your life. They seep in like fog through cracks. By the time you notice, you're already entangled. But why does this matter to you? Because in a world obsessed with connection, we've forgotten the dangers of false intimacy. Jung spent his life warning us, ignore the shadow, and it possesses you. Today we'll face it together. Feel that curiosity, building good. It's the first step toward awakening. Before we go deeper, if this resonates with something you've experienced, if you've ever felt that unsettling combination of being seen and being studied, hit that subscribe button. This journey requires witnesses. We're about to expose what most psychology refuses to name, and you'll want to remember every word. Now let me tell you something that will shake the ground beneath your feet. The dark empath isn't hiding in the shadows. They're sitting at your dinner table. They're the voice on the other end of your daily phone call. They're the person whose contact name in your phone has a heart emoji next to it. They're your partner who seems to read your mind, your best friend who finishes your sentences, your sibling who's known you since birth, your colleague who became your chosen family, the person you call first with your victories and your disasters, the one you've handed every key to every locked room in your soul. Stop and think about that for a second. Really think about it. We build walls against strangers. We watch for red flags on first dates. We're careful with new people. But the ones already inside, the ones we've labeled safe, the ones we've known for years, we don't watch them at all. We've decided they're trustworthy, and that decision becomes permanent, unquestioned, sacred. That's the blind spot. That's the kill zone. That's exactly where they operate. Because here's the brutal truth nobody wants to say out loud. The person most capable of destroying you is the person you've given the instruction manual. The one who knows which words make you crumble, which silences make you panic, which memories make you vulnerable, which fears keep you awake at night. You didn't just let them in, you gave them a guided tour of every weakness, every wound, every way to break you. And some of them took notes. Proximity isn't safety, it's access. History isn't trust, It's information. And the word family or friend or partner isn't a shield. It's sometimes the disguise that lets the knife get close enough to cut deep. The most dangerous predator is the one you've already invited into your home, the one you defend to others, the one whose name comes up and you say, "Oh, they would never." But would never what? Would never use your vulnerability against you, would never manipulate your emotions, would never make you question your own reality while claiming to understand you better than anyone. Check that assumption. Check it hard. If this is making you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is your intuition, trying to tell you something you've been ignoring. If a specific person's face just flashed in your mind, pay attention to that. If you're thinking, "But they love me," ask yourself what love looks like when it's used as a weapon. Right now, pause this video and do something for me. Drop a comment. Just one word, "seen." That's it. Just that one word if someone close to you has made you feel crazy for trusting your own perceptions. If someone who claims to know you best has used that knowledge to control rather than cherish you. If you're starting to see the pattern in someone you never thought to question. Type "seen" so you know you're not alone in this. So others scrolling through know they're not crazy. So we build a community of people who've had their eyes opened and can't close them again. And if this information could save someone else from years of confusion and pain, share this video. Send it to that friend who keeps making excuses for someone who's slowly dismantling them. Post it, pass it on, because the people who need this message most are often the ones least likely to search for it. They're still in the fog, still believing that being understood means being loved. Help wake them up. Let me paint you a picture that shouldn't exist. Someone who reads your emotions with perfect accuracy, who tears up when you share your pain, and then uses that exact understanding to dismantle your reality. That's the dark empath. For decades, psychology had clean categories. Empaths on one side, sensitive souls who feel everything. Manipulators on the other, narcissists who use people without feeling. But in 2020, research confirmed what Jung always suspected. Light and darkness can merge in the same person, creating something far more dangerous than either alone. Nearly 1 in 5 people possess this combination. Deep emotional understanding paired with a willingness to exploit it. Look around your life right now. Your workplace, your friend circle, your family. Statistically, someone close to you fits this profile. Here's where the Carl Jung Empath concept becomes crucial. Jung didn't study nice feelings and positive psychology. He dove into the darkest corners of the human mind and discovered that every quality, no matter how beautiful, casts a shadow. Courage without wisdom becomes recklessness. Love without boundaries becomes possession. And empathy without conscience becomes the most dangerous weapon in the human arsenal. Jung wrote about the shadow, everything you've denied about yourself, pushed down and refused to look at. It doesn't disappear. It gathers in your subconscious mind, growing stronger until it runs your life from behind the scenes. Most people never face their shadow. But the dark empath had a different relationship with darkness from the beginning. Picture a child in chaos, a parent unpredictable, loving one moment, cruel the next. That child learned survival meant reading the room perfectly, catching every micro-expression, every warning sign. They developed emotional intelligence, not from love, but from necessity. Understanding emotions meant staying alive. Now here's the psychological fracture Jung would find fascinating. Healthy empathy flows in 3 directions: understanding what someone feels, actually feeling it with them, and feeling moved to help. But in the dark empath, something splits. They have the first 2 in abundance, perfect understanding and emotional resonance. But that third piece, the impulse to ease suffering, it's missing, deliberately severed. When genuine caring became too dangerous, Their psyche made a brutal calculation: keep the understanding, keep the feeling, but kill the caring. Understanding gives knowledge. Feeling gives precision, but caring makes you weak. They performed psychological surgery on themselves, cutting away compassion while keeping empathy intact. What emerged was someone who can map your inner world with perfect accuracy and feel no obligation to treat that knowledge with reverence. Think about what that means practically. A narcissist walks into a room and sees only their own reflection in everyone else's eyes. They're so wrapped up in themselves that they miss half of what's actually happening. They're powerful, yes, but they're also blind. A psychopath walks in and sees nothing but tools, no emotional resonance, no real understanding of the inner lives around them. They can hurt people, but in a blunt, imprecise way. But the dark empath. They walk in and see everything. Every insecurity written in body language, every wound betrayed by word choice, every need hanging unspoken in the air. They see it, they feel it, and then they calculate how to use it. This is what makes the empath awakening so crucial for those of us on the receiving end. We've been taught that empathy equals goodness, that someone who understands us must care about us. We've absorbed this cognitive bias so deeply that we can't imagine someone wielding emotional intelligence as a weapon. But Jung knew better. He understood that every human capacity is morally neutral until directed by will. A surgeon's knife can save a life or end one. Fire can warm your home or burn it down. And empathy can heal your deepest wounds or exploit them with surgical precision. The tool itself isn't good or evil. It's the hand that wields it, and the heart behind that hand that matters. So when you meet someone who seems to get you on a level nobody else ever has, your nervous system floods with relief. Finally, someone speaks your language. Finally, you're not alone. But Jung would whisper a warning in your ear: check the shadow. Look at what they do with that understanding, not just that they have it. Watch where their empathy flows, and more importantly, where it stops. Because here's the pattern that emerges once you know what to look for. Their empathy toward you is intense, focused, almost overwhelming in its precision. But watch how they talk about others. Listen to the contempt barely disguised as concern. Notice how quickly compassion evaporates for anyone who's no longer useful. See how their understanding of others' pain never quite translates into changed behavior. That's the split Jung would recognize immediately. Empathy divorced from morality. Understanding severed from caring. Emotional intelligence weaponized into emotional warfare. And the terrifying part: they're often not consciously malicious. This is just how their psyche organized itself to survive. They genuinely don't understand why you're hurt when they use your vulnerabilities against you. After all, you gave them that information freely, didn't you? You opened up. That's on you. They're just working with the data you provided. This is the mindset shift that has to happen if you're going to protect yourself. You have to stop assuming that being understood equals being safe. You have to develop the discernment to tell the difference between someone who sees you and wants to help you grow versus someone who sees you and wants to use what they've learned for their own ends. Jung spent his whole life teaching people to integrate their shadows, to look at the dark parts of themselves without flinching, to reclaim the energy trapped in denial, to become whole. But the dark empath represents a different path. They looked at their shadow, yes. They faced the darkness, absolutely. But instead of integrating it toward wholeness, they weaponized it toward control. Instead of healing the split between knowing and caring, they deepened it. They became experts in darkness while maintaining the mask of light. That's the impossible hybrid. That's the paradox that shouldn't exist but does. Someone who combines the sensitivity of an empath with the calculated cruelty of a predator. Someone who makes you feel more understood than you've ever been while simultaneously using that understanding to keep you trapped. And once you see this pattern, once your eyes adjust to spotting it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. In the friend who always knows exactly what to say to keep you helping them, but never quite reciprocates. In the partner who can read your every mood, but somehow always uses that knowledge to avoid accountability. In the coworker who seems so supportive, but whose support somehow always leaves you feeling smaller, more doubtful, more dependent on their approval. This is the awakening. This is the moment when you realize that empathy, that quality you've always associated with goodness, can be turned inside out and used as a trap. When you understand that being seen isn't always being loved. When you recognize that sometimes the person who understands you best is the one you should fear most. Jung would tell you this awakening is painful but necessary. That you can't protect yourself from a threat you refuse to acknowledge. That the first step toward freedom is always seeing the cage clearly, even when the bars are made of words that sounded like love. Now we descend into the machinery of it all. How does this actually work? How does someone use understanding as a weapon? Let's walk through the stages of entrapment, because once you see the blueprint, you'll never be fooled again. It starts with persona engineering, crafting a mask so perfect it fits you better than your own face. But this isn't their mask. It's yours, built from your own disclosures. They don't ask probing questions. They remember everything. Your childhood dog mentioned in passing resurfaces 3 months later with perfect nostalgia. Your mother's disappointed tone, they never use it, creating false safety. Your secret fear of abandonment, they position themselves as the antidote. This is memory weaponized. Not warm recall, but cold cataloging. Every detail becomes a data point in their psychological profile of you. Watch their body language. They're not listening, they're studying. Head tilting at your exact angle. Breathing synchronized. Linguistic patterns echoing yours. This isn't natural mirroring. This is deliberate calibration, and your subconscious mind knows the difference. But your conscious mind overrides that knowing. You're so starved for understanding, so tired of explaining yourself, that when someone reflects you back this perfectly, you ignore the small voice whispering that something's off. Jung called this the seduction of the persona, when we mistake the mask for the person, the performance for reality. Here's where it gets darker. They're not just mirroring you randomly. They're specifically echoing your wound patterns. If you learned as a child that love meant sacrifice, they'll let you sacrifice for them and call it devotion. If you learned that your worth came from being needed, they'll need you in ways that feel fulfilling at first and suffocating later. If you learned that conflict meant abandonment, they'll punish you with withdrawal rather than honest fighting. They're reading your attachment style like a manual and then activating it on purpose. This isn't intuitive kindness. This is calculated emotional engineering based on your revealed vulnerabilities. And slowly, imperceptibly, the cage starts forming. They begin with small boundary tests. Can they text you at 3 in the morning with an emotional crisis? You respond because you care, and you've just set a precedent. Can they borrow money and repay it on a vague timeline? You agree because you trust them, and you've just shown that your boundaries are negotiable. Can they make plans and cancel last minute repeatedly while you adjust your life around their unpredictability? You accommodate because you're flexible, and you've just taught them that your time isn't really valuable. Each yes seems insignificant in isolation. But they're not isolated. They're links in a chain, and the chain is tightening around you so gradually that you don't notice until you try to move freely and discover you can't. Jung wrote about something he called participation mystique, a state where boundaries between self and other blur, where you can't tell where you end and they begin. In healthy relationships, this creates intimacy. In toxic ones, it creates control. The dark empath engineers this state deliberately. They want you merged with them, dissolved into their orbit, unable to tell which feelings are yours and which have been planted. They accomplish this through a brilliant psychological trick. They share vulnerable stories that seem to create reciprocity. They cry at the right moments. They reveal struggles that mirror yours just enough to create that twin flame feeling, that sense that you've finally found your person. But pay attention to what actually happens after these revelations. Does the relationship deepen in ways that serve both of you? Or does their vulnerability somehow always become your responsibility? This is trauma bonding in action. A term that sounds dramatic, but describes something horrifyingly common. They create a cycle of pain and relief, tension and resolution, where they're the source of both your greatest distress and your greatest comfort. Your nervous system gets addicted to this roller coaster. The lows make the highs feel higher. The relief after they stop being cold is so intense that you forget to question why they went cold in the first place. And all the while, they're building what we might call your emotional blueprint. They track your triggers with scientific precision. Which parent's tone makes you fold in conversation? What kind of silence makes you rush to fill it with confession? Which compliments make you glow? And which criticisms make you shrink? They're mapping your psychological terrain so thoroughly that they know it better than you do. This is where shadow work becomes critical for understanding what's happening. Your shadow contains all your unexamined wounds, your unprocessed pain, your hidden shame. The dark empath doesn't heal these shadows. They exploit them. They find the tender spots you haven't healed yet and press on them, sometimes to hurt you, sometimes to control you, always to maintain power. Think about a specific example. Maybe you have a wound around being too much, too emotional, too needy, too intense. You've spent years trying to be less, to shrink yourself, to not burden others. The dark empath intuitively understands this. At first, they celebrate your intensity. You're not too much for them. You're exactly right. You expand, you relax, you finally let yourself be big. But later, when you set a boundary or express a need, they don't want to meet. Suddenly, you're too much again. Suddenly, your intensity is a problem. And because they built you up first, the withdrawal of that acceptance is devastating. You scramble to become small again, to be acceptable again, to not be too much. They didn't do this by accident. They mapped your wound, activated it with acceptance, then used it as a lever to control your behavior. And the cruelest part is that you might thank them for being so understanding when they finally accept you again, not realizing they manufactured the entire cycle. Watch what happens when you try to pull back or establish boundaries. This is where you'll see what Jung might call the extinction burst, a spike in their efforts to pull you back in. Suddenly they're vulnerable again. Suddenly they need you desperately. Suddenly they remember everything you love about them and perform it perfectly. Or if that doesn't work, suddenly you're the problem. You're oversensitive. You're making things up. You're letting your past trauma distort your perception of their innocent intentions. This is gaslighting through empathy, and it's devastatingly effective. They're using their understanding of your psychology to make you doubt your own reality. They know that if they validate the feeling while reframing the cause, you'll accept their version because it comes wrapped in apparent understanding. I completely get why you'd feel abandoned when I disappeared for 3 days without warning. That makes total sense given your childhood. But I wasn't actually abandoning you, I just needed space. Your father wound is making you see abandonment, where there's actually just healthy independence. Kraurki, see how that works. They've acknowledged your feeling, demonstrated understanding of your history, and completely absolved themselves of responsibility for their behavior. And because it came from someone who seems to truly get you, you might believe it. You might spend the next week working on your father wound instead of questioning why someone who claims to understand that wound would trigger it so casually. This is the depth of the manipulation. It's not crude or obvious. It's subtle, wrapped in apparent care, delivered with perfect emotional pitch. And it works because most of us have been taught that being understood equals being loved. We've absorbed this cognitive bias so deeply that we can't separate the two. But the dark empath proves they're not the same thing at all. Understanding without caring is the weapon. Empathy without ethics is the wound. Emotional intelligence without integrity is the trap. And the trap tightens through intermittent reinforcement, a pattern so addictive that it's used in everything from casino slot machines to abusive relationships. They're not consistently cold or consistently warm. They alternate unpredictably. You never know which version you're getting. Is today the day they're your best friend, or the day they barely acknowledge you? Is this the conversation where they hang on your every word, or the one where they make you feel invisible? This unpredictability is chemically addictive. Your brain starts chasing the high of their approval, the relief of their warmth after a cold period. You become oriented around their emotional weather, constantly checking the forecast, adjusting your behavior to maximize the chances of sunshine. You don't even realize you've stopped living your own life. You're managing theirs, predicting their moods, performing for their approval. Jung understood this as possession, when an unconscious content takes over the conscious personality. But in this case, you're not possessed by your own shadow. You're possessed by theirs. Their need for control has colonized your psyche. Their emotional patterns have become your reality. Their assessment of you has replaced your assessment of yourself. And here's what makes it so difficult to escape. By the time you realize what's happening, they have so much information about you that leaving feels dangerous. They know your secrets. They know your shames. They know exactly what to say to make you doubt yourself. They know which friends might side with them if you try to tell your story. They've woven themselves so deeply into your psychological fabric that extracting them feels like it would unravel you completely. This is the velvet cage. This is the trap that feels like intimacy. This is why the person who seems to understand you best can be the most dangerous person in your life. They've used that understanding not to honor you, but to own you. Not to help you grow, but to keep you manageable. Not to love you, but to leverage you. And the deepest cut, you might have helped them build it. Every vulnerability you shared in good faith became a brick. Every truth you trusted them with became a bar. Every time you explained your inner world, you handed them the blueprint to your prison. This isn't your fault. You were taught that openness creates connection. And it does when the other person meets your openness with integrity. But when they meet it with calculation, your honesty becomes your handcuffs. Now, we need to talk about something uncomfortable. Why you, not as blame, but as power. To reclaim agency by understanding the dynamics. Jung believed nothing in our lives is random. Our wounds attract certain people. Our shadows call to other shadows. Your unintegrated pain seeks familiar patterns because familiarity feels safer than the unknown. You didn't randomly encounter a dark empath. Something in you constellated them. Something made you visible to them. This isn't about shame, it's about understanding the mechanism so you can dismantle it. Think about deep thinking for a moment, the kind of pattern recognition that happens below conscious awareness. Your subconscious mind is always scanning for familiar dynamics. If you grew up with a parent who was unpredictably loving and cruel, your nervous system learned that pattern. It got wired to recognize it, to navigate it, to try to fix it. And decades later, that same nervous system might recognize a similar pattern in a new person and think, I know this dance. I can win this time. I can make them love me consistently if I just do it right. But you can't win because they're not your parent. They're not a hurt child you can heal with enough love. They're an adult who has chosen to weaponize empathy, and your healing energy just becomes fuel for their manipulation. The dark empath has a radar for certain qualities. They're drawn to people who are highly empathic themselves, people who feel deeply care, genuinely give freely. They're drawn to those with what we might call sacred wounds, the kind of early hurts that left you open, vulnerable, perpetually trying to earn love. They're drawn to givers, healers, fixers, people who learned that their value comes from what they provide for others. If you're reading this and feeling seen, if you're recognizing yourself in this description, here's what that means. You have beautiful qualities that were exploited. Your openness isn't stupidity. Your empathy isn't weakness. Your desire to understand and help isn't foolishness. These are genuinely valuable human capacities. They just met someone who saw them as resources to extract rather than gifts to honor. But here's the shadow work that needs to happen. What in you made those qualities available for exploitation? Not to blame yourself, but to understand and protect yourself going forward. Because Jung was clear about this, if you don't integrate your shadow, you're doomed to repeat your patterns. If you don't look at why this dynamic felt familiar, even while it hurt, you'll find yourself in another version of it. Maybe you learned early that your needs were burdensome, that love was something you had to earn through service, that being too much would drive people away. So you became less. You learned to give without asking. You learned to understand others while hiding yourself. You learned to be the strong one, the one who doesn't need the one who can handle anything. And the dark empath spotted that immediately. They saw someone who wouldn't demand reciprocity because you didn't believe you deserved it. They saw someone whose boundaries were weak because you'd been taught that having boundaries made you selfish. They saw someone who would interpret their hot and cold behavior as your failing rather than theirs. This is participation mystique gone wrong, where you lose yourself in the other person so completely that you can't tell which pain is yours and which is theirs. You start carrying their emotions, managing their reactions, sacrificing your reality to maintain their comfort. And because you're highly empathic, this feels natural to you. This is what you've always done. This is how you've always loved. But here's the brutal truth Jung would force you to face. That's not love. That's codependency masquerading as compassion. That's your wound trying to heal itself by fixing them. That's your shadow, the needy, vulnerable part you've disowned, seeking acceptance through their approval. Real love has boundaries. Real empathy has discernment. Real connection requires two sovereign individuals, not one person dissolving into another. And until you integrate that truth, until you reclaim the parts of yourself you've been exiling, your needs, your anger, your right to be seen as fully as you see others, you'll keep attracting people who exploit your imbalance. Think about this pattern in terms of spiritual awakening. Not the Instagram version where everything is light and love, but the Jungian version where awakening means facing everything you've been avoiding. An empath awakening isn't about becoming more empathic. You're already there. It's about developing what Jung called the transcendent function, and the ability to hold opposites in tension until a third thing emerges. You can be empathic and boundaried. You can be open and protected. You can understand someone deeply and still refuse to tolerate their behavior. You can feel someone's pain and not make it your responsibility. These aren't contradictions. They're integrations. They're the mark of psychological maturity. The dark empath represents in a twisted way one possible integration of empathy and shadow, where understanding merged with darkness to create control. But there's another path available to you. Your integration doesn't have to be their integration. You can unite your empathy with your power, your sensitivity with your strength, your openness with your wisdom. This requires looking at cognitive biases you might be carrying. The belief that understanding someone means excusing them. The assumption that empathy requires self-sacrifice. The conviction that being sensitive means being weak. The fear that having boundaries makes you just like the people who hurt you. None of these are true. They're distortions that made you vulnerable, and dismantling them is how you become immune. Here's what integration actually looks like in practice. You start noticing when your body says no, even while your mouth says yes. You start trusting that quiet discomfort more than their seemingly perfect words. You start asking yourself not, do they understand me? But, do they respect me? Do they protect what they understand about me, or do they use it? You develop what Jung called differentiation, and the ability to stand in your own psychological space, without merging, without losing yourself, without needing their approval to know your own worth. You practice selective vulnerability, sharing only with people who've proven they treat your tenderness with care. You learn that some doors should remain locked until someone demonstrates they deserve the key. This isn't about becoming closed or cynical. It's about becoming sovereign. It's about matching your outer openness with inner solidity. It's about having empathy flow from fullness rather than from wound. And yes, this means grieving. Grieving the fantasy of who you thought they were. Grieving the version of yourself who believed that understanding equaled safety. Grieving the time you gave the energy you spent the parts of yourself you compromised trying to make it work. Jung knew that transformation always requires death. Death of old identities, old beliefs, old patterns. This is your death and rebirth. But here's what emerges on the other side. You become someone who can read people even better than before. But now you read them for compatibility with your values, not for how to make them happy. You become someone whose empathy is a gift they extend, not a default setting they can't turn off. You become someone who understands that true emotional intelligence includes the intelligence to know when to withdraw that emotion, when to protect it, when to save it for people who reciprocate. You become what Jung called individuated, fully yourself, integrated whole. Not perfect, but complete. Not without wound, but no longer controlled by it. Not without shadow, but conscious of it, and choosing how to work with it rather than being driven by it unconsciously. This is the work. This is the only way out that doesn't just lead to another version of the same trap. You have to look at your own participation in the dynamic. Not to blame yourself, but to free yourself. Not to shame yourself, but to empower yourself. Not to dwell in past mistakes, but to ensure you don't repeat them. Because here's what the dark empath is counting on. That you'll be so kind, so understanding, so committed to seeing the best in people. That you'll ignore your own knowing. That you'll override your instincts in service of giving them another chance. That you'll confuse having compassion for them with having no protection for yourself. But you can be compassionate from a distance. You can understand someone and still refuse contact with them. You can wish them healing while recognizing you're not the person to provide it. These aren't contradictions. They're wisdom. So here we are. You've descended into the darkness, looked at the mechanics of manipulation, faced your own participation in the pattern. Now we rise. Now we integrate. Now we transform. This isn't about becoming hard or closed. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness, Jung insisted, always includes both light and shadow, both softness and strength, both empathy and discernment. The goal isn't to kill your empathic nature. The goal is to develop what we might call sovereign empathy that comes from choice, not compulsion, from fullness, not wound, from wisdom, not innocence. Let's talk about what practical transformation actually looks like. Not in some distant future when you're healed, but starting right now today in your actual life, with its messy relationships and complex dynamics. First, you start starving the patterns that fed the dynamic. The dark empath needed constant access to your inner world to maintain power. So you begin practicing what Jung might call conscious concealment, not lying, but choosing what you reveal and to whom. Every person doesn't deserve your full story. Every relationship doesn't require complete transparency. Some information is sacred, and you're the guardian of that temple. When someone asks invasive questions, you can smile and redirect. When someone fishes for emotional data, you can offer surface information without the depths. When someone tries to make you feel guilty for having boundaries around your privacy, you can recognize that as a red flag rather than a call to open up more. This isn't being fake. This is being wise. Second, you develop what we might call shadow literacy, the ability to read the unspoken dynamics in any interaction. Your body already knows how to do this. You've just been trained to override its signals. That subtle tension in your chest when someone says all the right words, that's information. That exhaustion after spending time with someone who seemed so nice, that's data. That impulse to suddenly explain or justify yourself when you've done nothing wrong, that's your nervous system detecting manipulation. Jung talked about the body as the unconscious made visible. Your body speaks in sensation what your mind hasn't yet put into words. Start listening. When your shoulders tighten around someone, ask why. When you notice yourself monitoring your words, carefully question what you're afraid of. When you leave an interaction feeling drained rather than filled, examine what actually happened beneath the surface pleasantries. Third, you practice what might be called strategic incompleteness in your responses. The dark empath trained you to explain yourself fully, to make sure you were understood, to leave no room for misinterpretation. They used your completeness against you, mining those explanations for vulnerabilities. Now you learn the power of no without elaboration. That doesn't work for me. Without explanation. I'm not available for that. Without justification. I need to think about it. Without a timeline. Watch what happens when you do this. Healthy people might be momentarily surprised, but they respect it. They don't push. They don't make you feel guilty. They don't suddenly treat you differently because you've established a boundary. But the people who've been exploiting your openness, they react. They push back. They make you wrong for not explaining. They suddenly need to understand your reasoning, your motives, your thought process. And their reaction tells you everything you need to know. Fourth, you develop what we might call empathic discernment. You don't stop feeling people. You don't close off your emotional intelligence. But you add a layer of assessment. You start asking, is this person's pain my responsibility? Does their crisis actually require my immediate response? Am I helping them grow or enabling them to avoid their own work? Is their understanding of me increasing my freedom or my dependence on their approval? This is where mindset shift becomes critical. You've been operating under the belief that empathy means unconditional availability, that understanding someone means absorbing their emotion, that being sensitive means taking on others' burdens. But Jung would tell you that's not empathy, that's enmeshment. Real empathy can witness someone's pain without becoming it, can understand someone's struggle without making it your own to solve. Fifth, you begin the practice of regular shadow work. Not once, not as a crisis response, but as an ongoing discipline. You sit with the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, the anger you've been suppressing because spiritual people don't get angry, the selfishness you've been denying because good people are always giving, the capacity for manipulation you possess but have never wanted to acknowledge. Jung was absolutely clear about this. Whatever you don't integrate, you project. Whatever you refuse to see in yourself, you'll encounter in others. The dark empath you attracted partly appeared because they embodied shadow qualities you couldn't admit were in you too. Not their cruelty, but their boundaries. Not their manipulation, but their clarity about getting their needs met. Not their coldness, but their ability to prioritize themselves. You don't have to become them to reclaim these qualities. But you do have to admit, you have them. You do have the capacity to manipulate. You've just chosen not to use it, which is very different from pretending it doesn't exist. You do have the ability to be strategic about relationships. You've just labeled that as bad, instead of recognizing it as necessary discernment. You do have self-interest. You've just been taught to be ashamed of it, instead of directing it consciously. As you integrate these shadows, something remarkable happens. You become less attractive to predators. They're looking for people who don't know their own darkness, who can be made to feel guilty for normal human needs, who will sacrifice themselves to avoid being seen as selfish. When you own your shadow, when you can say, "Yes, I'm being strategic right now," or "Yes, I'm prioritizing my needs," without shame, you no longer fit their profile. You're not prey anymore. Sixth, you practice what Jung called active imagination with your own subconscious mind. You create dialogues with the parts of yourself that got you into this dynamic. You talk to the part that needed to be seen so badly you ignored red flags. You listen to the part that's terrified of being alone, so it settled for connection that cost you yourself. You honor the part that wanted to believe in goodness so much that it denied clear evidence of harm. These aren't mistakes to be ashamed of. They're expressions of deep human needs that were unmet in healthy ways, so they got met in unhealthy ones. Talking to these parts with compassion rather than judgment allows them to finally relax, to stop driving your behavior from the shadows. Seventh, and perhaps most importantly, you build what we might call a council of mirrors, people who reflect you accurately, not strategically. Not yes people who tell you what you want to hear. Not critics who make you feel small. But people who see you clearly, can handle your complexity, and reflect back both your light and shadow with honesty and care. These are the people who'll tell you when you're falling into old patterns, who'll call you forward into growth, who'll hold you accountable without shaming you. The dark empath isolated you from these people. They subtly undermined your other relationships, made themselves indispensable, created dynamics where you needed them to interpret your own reality. Rebuilding connection with people who don't need to control you to love you is essential to staying free. Now, what does your life actually look like on the other side of this transformation? You walk into rooms differently. You're still warm, still open. But there's something else there now, a kind of groundedness that wasn't there before. You connect easily, but you don't lose yourself in the connection. You can feel someone's pain without drowning in it. You can understand their perspective without abandoning your own. When someone tries the old tricks, see the intense mirroring, the strategic vulnerability, the intermittent reinforcement, you see it immediately. Not with paranoia, but with clarity. You might even feel compassion for the person using these tactics, recognizing the wound that drives them. But your compassion doesn't translate into compliance. You can understand them completely and still walk away completely. You develop what Jung would recognize as psychological sovereignty. The ability to stand in your own inner authority, to trust your perceptions, to know your worth, isn't dependent on anyone else's assessment. The dark empath's power came from making you doubt yourself, making you need their version of reality more than you trusted your own. That power evaporates when you reclaim your right to know what you know, to feel what you feel, to trust what you perceive. This doesn't mean you never get hurt again. Transformation isn't invulnerability, but you respond differently to hurt now. You don't immediately assume it's your fault. You don't twist yourself into smaller shapes to avoid conflict. You don't explain away red flags to preserve a relationship. You feel the hurt, assess the situation clearly, and respond from wisdom rather than wound. People notice the change in you. Some celebrate it, these are your people. Others resist it, and these are the ones who benefited from your old patterns. Their resistance is information. The person who gets angry when you establish boundaries was counting on you not having them. The person who calls you changed when you stop over-functioning for them was attached to your dysfunction. The person who says you're not as open as you used to be was exploiting that openness. Let them be uncomfortable with your growth. Their discomfort is not your responsibility to manage. This is part of your new operating system. Here's what you've become. Someone who can read every social dynamic with clarity. Someone who understands manipulation not because you use it, but because you've seen it from every angle. Someone whose empathy is a choice they make consciously, not a wound response they can't control. Someone who knows that the deepest spiritual work isn't about transcending the shadow, but integrating it. Not about becoming pure light, but becoming whole. You're not naive anymore. You can't be. You've seen how empathy can be weaponized, how understanding can be used to entrap, how the language of healing can be deployed to harm. But you haven't become cynical either. You've become wise. And wisdom holds both the possibility of beauty and the reality of danger without collapsing into either extreme. Jung spent his entire life teaching one core truth. Wholeness is the goal, not perfection. Not being only light, not transcending your humanity, but becoming fully consciously human with all the light and shadow that entails. The dark empath taught you this lesson in the hardest way possible. But the lesson once learned sets you free in ways that easy lessons never could. You now possess something precious. The ability to navigate human complexity without losing yourself. The capacity to love without dissolving. The strength to remain open without being defenseless. The wisdom to know that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's dysfunction. This is your transformation, not from wounded to healed in some simplistic way, but from unconscious to conscious. From driven by shadow to working with shadow. From seeking wholeness in others to creating it in yourself. From believing empathy makes you weak to knowing that empathy combined with boundaries makes you unbreakable. You've descended into the underworld of manipulation and emerged not bitter, but wise. Not closed, but boundaried. Not less empathic, but more sovereign. And that makes you dangerous to anyone who would exploit sensitivity as weakness. It makes you safe for people who deserve your gifts. It makes you free. If you've walked this journey with me, if you're seeing yourself in these patterns and feeling both the pain of recognition and the hope of transformation, drop a comment below saying, "I see the shadow now." Let's build a community of people who've done this work, who understand that true strength comes from integration, not denial. Subscribe for more explorations into the depths of human psychology. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember Jung's final teaching? The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who they wanted you to be, not who trauma shaped you into, but who you choose to become when you finally integrate all the parts you've been denying. That person is sovereign, whole, and absolutely unstoppable. Welcome home to yourself.